wow, look at all those colors. I can only imagine how useful it would be to be able to randomly generate those colors from a single color or image. Well, how can I do that? Well, today I'm going to show you how. Or if you're lazy, you can just download the node group in the description. So that's about it. Let's get into it. Alright, so here's our node group that we will be making. And you can see we've got the blue coming in from this RGB, and our hue slider will let us change how much the hue varies. And then our saturation slider lets us determine, how much that saturation changes. And then our value slider lets us determine how bright or dark these things get. And it is random for every single object. Look at that. Wonderful. Okay. Now, the actual node, the group is kind of scary looking, but it's just doing the same math 3 different times because you need it for the hue, saturation, and value. Alright, so we are just going to essentially make that node group. So Shift A to add a hue, saturation. And this is going to be like the crux of our node group because this is doing all the things that we need it to do already. We just need to determine how it does it. So we're going to press Control G. That's going to bring us into a node group. And we don't want this all the way over here. And also, to get out of the node group, just press Tab. And then if you're selecting this, just press Tab again. That lets you get in and out of node groups. And now we're just going to hit Control, right click, and drag across all these, and it disconnects them. We only want the color from here. That's all we're really concerned about right now. Okay, and now these inputs, we're going to address this first, just so we know what we're dealing with. On the right, we can tell it, okay, so this is the hue, and we're going to rename this by double clicking on there. Go hue, var, just so we know, hue variance. It's not just the hue. Saturation, var, value, var. And this factor we can just delete because we don't need it. And now we want to make sure all these defaults are set to 0 and that the maximums are set to 10. So that means by default our amount of variance for hue, saturation, or value by default for this node group is always going to be 0 if we just import it from somewhere else or use it like that. So now we're going to Shift A, object info, and this is going to let us get our random color here. And also I am just going to connect up this node group to my color because we want to be able to see what's going on in real time. So our random, if I just view the random here, what it's doing is it's giving us a random value between 0 and 1. And that's pretty useful, and we just need to figure out how to remap that. So what we're going to do is we're going to Shift A, value, and we're going to make 3 of these. Shift D to duplicate those. And we are just going to take the values that are in here, so that's 0.5, 1, and 1, and we're just going to put them into these. So we still have these values for later. And I'll start with the top one, which is going to be the hue. And Shift A, add a math, duplicate that, turn it to subtract, and actually we'll put the subtract on top. This will make sense in a second. Shift A, map range. And the map range is just going to take a value, and from a minimum to a maximum, it's going to convert it to a different like number space. So if you have a 0 and 1 and you want to convert it down to like values between 0 and 0.5, it will do that and keep all the things that were on the 0 to 1. It'll just squish them into that space instead of truncating it and cutting off all that extra data. So we are going to plug the 0.5 into the subtract. So it's going to be 0.5 minus whatever value is down here. And then the value is also going to go into the top of the add, so it's going to be 0.5 plus whatever that value is. Now that value that is at the bottom of these is going to be our hue variance. All right, so Shift A, reroute. This is just going to help things look a little cleaner. And we'll put this right there. Move these. Plug that into the bottom here. And then plug our hue hue variance into that. Now, the important part, put our random into the value, because that's the value that we want to squish down, essentially. And from a 0 to 1 range, which is what it's currently in, we're going to take our subtract and put that in the 2 minimum, and then the add is going to go to the 2 maximum. And now, if we did this right, the result goes into the hue, and this should... Oh, it's because these are all different. Okay. Make sure these are all set to 0. And also, make sure I was viewing this. So I just exited, Control-Shift-Click on that. And we'll Control-Shift-Click on this Principled BSDF. And all these shortcuts, if they're not working for you, just enable Node Wrangler. It's an add-on that's built in Blender. So now, we have no variance of the hue. But if we turn up our slider, all of a sudden we're getting all sorts of different colors. But it's also super touchy, which is kind of annoying to deal with. So, tab, and right here, we'll just duplicate one of these math nodes, and we'll turn it to multiply, and we'll put the value at 0.1. So now, everything that we input is just going to be divided by 10, so it'll be a little easier to work with because it kind of squishes our range down a little bit. Alright, so now that we've got that going, we'll do the same for this one. Move that down. Alright, so we'll take our multiply, our add, subtract, map range, and we'll just duplicate all of that. And make sure you're not on top of any of these lines, because sometimes it'll auto-connect something else. So now we have this, and we will plug our value into the tops of these again, and we will plug this saturation variance into the top of this multiply, and plug these into the bottom, and then make sure that our object info random is plugged into the value of this map range, and we'll just put that into the saturation. Now, if we turn our saturation value up, you can see we're starting to get some values that are changing in there. So you can already see how useful this can be, especially if you have leaves or really anything that you have a bunch of, and you can just share the same material, and as long as they're different objects, it will just slightly shift the colors around a little bit. This is a very dramatic example, but for leaves, for maybe trees or cars even, you can just have this value or any color value get inputted into there, and then it will just randomly change. And we're also going to want to make sure we duplicate these three again. Shift D, and then we'll plug the value variance into there. Do the same exact thing we've done the last two times, and plug it into the value. Now we can control, click, and drag, or not control, sorry, just click and drag down to set all these values to 0. And if we test each of these one at a time, it should work pretty well. If you go hue variance, and I'm holding shift to just move a little bit, look at that. So it's moving our hue good, our saturation, that's moving, and then our value, that is also moving, but it's all moving as one, which is kind of weird. We don't want that. What we want, oh, that's because we forgot to plug in the object random. Plug that into the value up here, and now this should work. Look at that. And the value is essentially kind of brightness, but not necessarily. It's a little different, but I don't even understand the difference. But yeah, so that is the node group. And then if you want this to be appendable, or something that you can take from one file and put into another, because you'll likely want to be able to use this multiple times, you can go to the group, and then node, and this is going to be named group input. Or actually, sorry, we'll tab out of this. Click that, and this is going to be the name of our group. And we'll click that. We'll just call it Randomizer. Oop. Randomizer. Enter. Alright. Now it's called Randomizer, and if you want it to have some sort of color, you can click that button. I don't really care. I never do that. And make sure this name is also changed to Randomizer. I don't really know, but some of these are different. So like in the file appending, it might have a different name than this if you, depending on what your names are for each one. I'm not sure why, but we'll just set this to 0 again. And then click this, because this will create a fake user. So it will save that chunk of data even if nothing's using it, so it'll always be around. Alright, and then if you want this in your default version of Blender, you can go ahead and take this, and I'm actually going to save this. So I will save this into my Blender tutorials folder. Random color generator. Tut. You're going to save that, and then you're going to open a new window of Blender, and you're not going to change anything. We're just going to basically shove this into the default file that Blender opens as. So don't change anything. Go to File, Append, and then again I am just going to go to my tut.blend, and we'll click that, and you can see in here we can get to the node tree, and we see Randomizer. We're just going to append that. So now we'll go File, Defaults, Save Startup File, and that's going to overwrite our existing startup file so that it will now always have this node group built into it. So if I go to Shading and I go Shift A, I will have a group that is called the Randomizer, and it should just work as expected. Look at that. So yeah, hopefully you think this is useful. If you have any questions, feel free to message me or leave a comment. And yeah, it'll be available for download just in the description. So if you have any problems or something's not working, just you can compare it with that, or you can just use that if this seems like too much work. So yeah, thanks.